to the Quiet Warrior Show, where we help top leaders find their pathway to incredible success and a lifetime of happiness. Here is your host, Tom Dutta, the Quiet Warrior.
All right, everybody, welcome to the Quiet Warrior Show. I'm your host, Tom Dutta, and we're going to rock today with a fantastic interview. We got a lot of entertainment in here. Surprise, surprise. Listen, if you're watching us, we're live streaming across Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Twitter. Those are live feeds. You're peeking in the studio, seeing the interview. You want to hit the subscribe button down there, and please subscribe to the YouTube channel. That'll allow us to have more people watch this show and promote the show and do more of these. Also, this will be produced into an international podcast and, excited to say, a YouTube premiere video. That'll be released at some point in the very near future. Everyone, I want to tell you a little bit about the guest I have on today, and he is in the green room. And let me just start off by saying that it's not on the surface. He is not who he appears to be. I stumbled into a coffee shop a few weeks ago and sat down with Mr. Gordie Hogg. And Gordie and I had an interesting conversation, and we were just storytelling. And I remember when I bring people on the show, I always look for, what's the why? What's the backstory? That the hero's journey narrative behind the show tells us that it's those stories that really are where we learn and are inspired. I'll tell you a little bit about Mr. Gordie Hogg. Many of you locally here, I'm in British Columbia, would know him. He is a respected visionary leader, and he's focused on making a positive difference as a change agent. He's done a lot of work locally, provincially, and internationally. He's been recognized for bringing people and resources together to positively influence changes in organizations within public and private sectors. He has been a member of the Legislative Assembly, a member of our Canadian Parliament, a mayor of the city of White Rock. I mean, this man has just an incredible bio. One of the things I ask myself is, what's the staying power? Why do people who are in public light, especially politicians, what gives them that sustainability, that staying power? It's because, as we know, when you put yourself out in the public eye, everyone, you literally reveal all. And so let's bring on to the screen here, Mr. Gordie Hogg. Gordie, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Tom. Delight to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. You're a man of many colors and talents, and I just want to start off with a fun little video here that somebody sent me. So we're going to put that on screen. Now, everybody, just stand by, because, as I said, Gordie has been in government, and he has many skills. All right, you see that there on the screen, Gordie?
I can, yes. Looks like me.
All right, if you're watching this, this is a clip. It goes back a ways, but what you're about to see here, Gordie, why don't you just tell us? You're basically at work and you're getting ready to have some conversations, correct?
Yeah, this is actually in the legislature in Victoria, and
okay.
I have decided not to run again, and so this is part of my final address to the legislature and to the people of BC.
All right, so we're going to start this video clip. Here we go. All right, we're just queuing up for those who are listening on the here we go.
Time to mention the rest of the people I wanted to mention. I will quickly try to find some people if I can find where I wrote them. I'll hum for you a little bit because I'm a really good. I've got a rap song that's on YouTube if you'd like to hear a couple bits of that. You so fly, flapping with your bling. You so fly, rapping when you sing. My home is on my peeps. All happy in the hood. My home is and my peeps. They're doing what they should. Find out what you got, give it up, take it home. Wind it. Gee, where did all those papers go? Okay. Okay.
All right, we're going to come back to reality now, Gordie. We're going to get rid of that off the screen. Just take us to. It's great to see yourself back. What do you feel when you see that, and tell us what was going through your mind when you were doing that?
Well, I was, as I say, it was my last address to the legislature because I decided not to run again, and you're given an extra period of time to be able to speak to everyone. And so I had used that time, and I'd come back a second day to pick up on it a little bit, and I'd made some further notes, which I didn't seem to be able to find as quickly as I wanted to. And so you can hear all the other members of the Legislative Assembly laughing in the background and picking on me as they often did.
Well, it's brilliant, and hey, everybody, there's not too many rapper videos out there for people in government. So this one, I think, go watch it on YouTube. We'll put it in the show notes and give it a like. Maybe it'll go viral, and Gordie might get a gig somewhere. I call you
I,
Doc. Hmm? Go
I
ahead.
can't even clap in time, so music doesn't work terribly well for me.
I've coined the name Dr. G, so that's what I call Gordie. Everybody. By the way, Gordie has a PhD, and I know we'll talk a bit about his passion for learning about the brain and science and different things. But Gordie, let's get into it. Take us back. I mean, when we were having that coffee, we started talking about the farm and where you grew up. And why I want to talk about this for a minute, I want to show you something. And for those who are on audio, you won't see this, but watch the video. Just hold on, Gordie. I basically just turned around and reached for this in my studio. This is basically about the 10-pound ball of fat that sits inside our heads. This is a real medical replica of a brain. And one of the things I've been studying, and I'm working to be accepted to do a PhD as well, since my brain injury, Gordie, is really understanding the impact that early year for children and youth, early year, what we call maltreatment. There's research that shows that the part of the brain that handles stressors, that it helps us react appropriately to stress in our lives, can be altered if there's maltreatment. Now, maltreatment can come in different forms. It can be things like violence you observing in your home or around you as you're growing. It can be physical, mental abuse personally. And they say that if there's somebody who's nurtured in that same environment, maybe the brain has an opportunity to develop more healthy. However, like I observed in my career and through many people I've had on, business leaders, Gordie, there's this part of the brain, unfortunately, when it doesn't develop in a healthy way, it manifests later in life as adults and can trip us up. In other words, what I'm looking at is Gordie on the screen, but if Gordie and I are in a room and he's doing something that maybe triggers me, my brain is telling me that's danger. And therefore, I'm very interested in your early years because you've had a very successful career. Tell us about the farm and some of those stories.
I guess my parents both grew up on farms. My father in Saskatchewan, and they lost everything in the Depression, and Dad was working on the farm next to it, and somebody came along and said because of the Depression they needed people to go to the university, and Dad didn't have any money, so they offered him if he would work in the cafeteria that they would pay his tuition, and he eventually got to go to university, eventually went to University of Western Ontario and became a physician. And he was supported by a lot of people in the community to do that, and felt very blessed to have had that opportunity. And he and my mother met. My mother was a nurse, and they met in the Air Force, and they had both lived hard and difficult lives living up to that point. Again, the Depression was a difficult time in our country, and they felt that they had to continue to give back. They felt so incredibly blessed to live in this country and this community, and so they did. They continued to give back and set an example for us. And I was with some people just 2 days ago, and they were talking about how their parents were never there. Their parents just seemed to be away all the time. Well, our dad was away all the time as well, but we never saw that as a problem. We felt that was a gift. He was out in the community. He would get up and go to the hospital before we ever got out of bed. He'd be home at 6 o'clock, and we'd be watching TV, and we get called for dinner at 6. That was our time together. And if he had a switch put in to turn off the power to where the TV was, if we didn't come when we were first called. So we would come, and then Mom somehow had us convinced that if we were well behaved, we could go on house calls with him. And we thought that was quite a reward. And not many other people thought of that as a reward, but we saw
I just want to jump in there, everybody. Another teaching moment on this show. I mean, we're learning hacks from Gordie. First of all, rapping, and now that little switch to turn off the TV. Today, I think we can program TVs to go off. Yeah. What I'm fascinated by, Gordie, is first of all another doctor in your life. Your father sounds like a great man, and it seems like you must have had somebody in your life around you. I'm assuming your mom who taught you that it's okay for dad to be away. As children, when our dads are away, that story you told is very relevant. It can become that woe is me story. Talk about your mom for a minute. She sounds like quite an amazing woman.
Yeah, she is an incredible woman, and she sort of ran things, but never let anybody know that she was running things. She told Dad that they were going to get out of the Air Force, that they were going to go and move to this community. And so we did. And I remember coming home from UBC one weekend, and I said to Dad, well, Dad, I need $20. And so he had me sit at the table and document what I needed it for. And he looked at it and said, you only need $18.25. And as I was heading out the door to go back to university, my mom called me into the kitchen and said, never ask him for $20. Ask him for $200. So about a month later, I said, Dad, I need $200. He said, okay, and handed it to me. So the little details and then the big picture, if it was something that he deemed to be important. And so mom taught us all of these little tricks in terms of how to manage and work with Dad, which was pretty unique and positive in terms of her understanding and her grasp for people.
Yeah. By the way, you should have told me that before I saw you for that coffee. I would ask for $200. I didn't get anything other than, well, actually, I got a lot of it, meeting you, and it was an honor and hearing you tell stories today. I started riffing in my mind. What happens, Gordie, is when you say things, my mind's multidimensional. I just go in different places. I just want to tell you one of the stories that just popped in my head was about some of the things I read about the Industrial Revolution. And back in that age, there was no roads and things like that. And some of the farming families, the mom and dad, they worked hard on the farm, and then at night, the whole family sat around the dinner table. So Industrial Revolution hits, and for whatever reason, the man has to go out to the job, and that was the beginning of life.
The other story that my mom I came home from school in grade 11, and she said, I just saw in the local paper that the short little league coaches, I think you should coach. And I said, gee, Mom, I'm playing ball 4 nights a week. How could I coach? She said, well, you could do it after school. So I got 2 friends, Larry and Derwin, and we started coaching. And 5 years later, our team won the right to go to Edmonton for the Western Canadian Championships. So the president of the league, Mr. Palmer, said to me, you've got to go to a White Rock City Council meeting and tell them you're taking this group of kids to Edmonton, and maybe they'll give you some pins or some money. So I went to the council meeting, came home after the council meeting. It was about 10:30 at night, and I was sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of milk, and Mom came in and said, how'd it go, son? I said, oh, Mom, it was old people making silly decisions. We were last on the agenda, which she reminded me I became one of those. So she said, no, son, I'd always hoped I'd raised you to be the kind of person, if you didn't like something, you wouldn't complain about it, but you'd get involved and try and make a difference. And then she walked over and started washing dishes, and I thought this was in the summer, and I had a lot of sleepless nights and thinking about it. And I said, I'll show you, I'll run for White Rock Council. And I did that in the fall and got elected. I think they probably thought I was my dad, not me, but that's how my life in politics started. I had virtually no interest in it other than what Mom had said to me. And ironically, on council was one of my first Little League coaches. Vin Coyne was a bit of a mentor when I was there, and I was in my mid-20s at that time.
Well, that's amazing. So think about that, everybody, what Gordie just told us. It's another teaching moment. Gordie, I've learned there's 2 different sides of a story. One is where we're defined by our parents or people around us. We're told you need to do this, and others we're not defined by that. We're shaped by that. Yeah. And I find that very interesting. Dad's a farmer. He's traveling. He's not there. Mom's a nurturer. And, you seem to have this encouragement, and, you took a path. He saw something in your story to be able to help people. There was when we were having that coffee, there was a bit of a defining moment you were telling me about. I was talking about my childhood and some experiences with my dad. God bless him. He's passed a few years ago. I love him to death, just starting to realize how much I miss him. And there was a moment where there was you were telling me about your dad and something that happened between you two. And there was this moment of humility. Tell us that story.
Well, that was a friend of mine, and I used to take the bus down to a theater, the Park Theater, and go to a show. And we had done that on a Friday night. And after the show, we took the bus home, but we got off the bus about 2 blocks early to go to a friend's place. And our friend's older brother had bought a car, so we helped him wash it and sand it, and I guess in some ways refurbish it. I lost total track of time and got home about 2:30 in the morning, and there weren't cell phones around in those days. And so I walked into the house and got into bed, and my dad came down and started just yelling at me. He'd never yelled at me like this before. And he said, your mom and I are so worried about them.
Yeah.
The next morning he came and sat on my bed, and actually was very emotional. He said, "I am so sorry. I am so terribly sorry I yelled at you. We were just so worried about where you were and what had happened." And that had such a profound impact on me in terms of, here I was the one that was wrong and he's the one that's apologizing. And that was something I look back on often in terms of how things evolved. So lots of interesting anecdotes, and I know that there are probably lots of other anecdotes in my life that I have not taken in such a positive, meaningful way.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that we all need to look at. And certainly, as Laverne and I were foster parents for a number of years, and that was almost serendipitous as well. I was coaching minor football at a park here, and a Saturday morning at 10 o'clock, a boy came across the tracks with a cardboard box, and I said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "Well, I got kicked out of my foster home. I'm just living on the beach." And Laverne and I had been married for, I don't know, 6 or 8 months. And so I said, "Oh, you can come and stay with us until this gets worked out." So he came, and the social worker came and decided that we had more room. So we ended up with 3 foster kids who were all 14, 15 and stayed with us till they graduated. And I'm sure we learned a lot more from them than they ever learned from us, but it was a wonderful experience. And I think just staying open to those little things that happen in our lives, that sometimes we can take them positively or we can take them negatively, and a little bit of compassion and caring is something that I have certainly received and tried in many ways to be able to give back in so many ways as well.
Yeah, it's thank you. One of the things, we'll honor your dad. What was his first name?
Al. He went by Al.
Al. And everybody, as you watch Gordie talking, you go back and watch this again, the video, you can see the change in your body language, your emotion, and truly that's a soul moving moment. I want to just talk about that for a minute with you, Gordie, about something that I experienced. Growing up as a kid, it was a bit different for me, and my dad left home when I was 12. Most people have read up on my story. And it wasn't until later in life, in 2018, where I had coffee with Dad, and really I'd been estranged from him. He was a very violent man, and the family just fell apart at age 12 and was kind of homeless. And I was thinking, if I wish back then maybe I came across you and Laverne and I put in my hand and said, "Hey, I'd like to be your foster kid." But taking people in like that, I mean, that's the part of this story, and we jump into the career part in a moment, that I think people, politicians, generally people don't always know that side of their story. I assume, you're put up in the public eye. Sometimes you're reading speeches and things. And I'm just going to be bold here and say, Gordie, that, the average person in the world lives on $2 a day. And guys like you and maybe even we're not relatable. And the way we become relatable is when we tell those stories. And the moment you told that story about your dad, you became very real. And I think it's a moment people will really come to their own feeling when they see this. So my dad, I remember I got, the only time I got drunk when I was a kid was on my grad night. Now you have to picture this scene. It's I've never told it publicly, but love you and your story, you're getting out of me. So we had this, I had this Chevy Chevette, and I remember, I wanted a new car. This was back in the 80s, and interest rates are 21%. And dear old Dad, this is when he was around, and he's drunk all the time. He said, "Sure, son." He says, "I'll take you down to the Delta Credit Union and we'll get you that car." So we walk into the credit union, and my dad had arranged a loan for $6,500, and he sat me down and he said to the loan officer, "Son, sign that." And he pays 21% interest. And I paid it off, Gordie. I worked at the Revenue Canada at night after high school and stuff like that. But, that was my dad. It's like, never expect a handout. I come home the night of my grad night. I was just so drunk. Me and my best friend, Cliff, long-haired Cliffy, I called him. And I didn't even remember. The next morning when I woke up, my dad found me in my bed, and I had a water bed, which was on the bottom floor of our home in Sunshine Hills where we lived. There was blood all over the bed, Gordie. And then when you go up to the car parked in the driveway, the door's open and it's running. The engine's running. So we piece it back together. And what had happened is, I guess I found my way back downstairs. I still remember it like yesterday. And I had a velour purple top on. And I couldn't get into the house. I lost my key because it was in the car. So I took a round Hoover vacuum cleaner, one of those big round ones. I threw it through the window, broke it. And as I was getting in, I went like this, and I still have the scars here on my hand. And I literally grabbed the window and fell in my bed. There was glass all over, and I collapsed. And there's blood. So my dad came down, and it's one of those moments for me, being an alcoholic and as bad a dude as he became through his own addiction. He just sat there and he looked at me and he said, "Son," he said, "I don't even have to tell you or say anything to you about this." He said, "I know that you're going to learn from it." And I remember now, he said, I love you. And that was it. Yeah. And I couldn't see that moment, Gordie, until you told me that story, actually, in this about your dad in the coffee shop, that I had forgotten about that one piece of the story, which is, "Son, I love you." And so I think that's a great moment, everybody. When sometimes parents make mistakes, we yell, we do things that are wrong, but always say the piece, "I love you," that connects to the person. Yeah. So thank you, Gordie, for that. I want to talk to you about. So now you're in the politics. What happened there? How did you move through that? Because you're 20 years old.
I was in my mid-20s. So I guess I was on council for 20 years, and 10 of those as mayor. And then I was also working I was a youth probation officer and involved in a number of something called the Unified Family Court, where we dealt with custody and access of children and separation and divorces of families. And so we worked hard at trying to mediate, arbitrate relationships that had broken down dramatically. And I should say in there that I have 2 sisters and a brother who have been enormous supports. Hopefully we've been enormous supports for each other growing up as well. And, recognizing that they're always there for us, for each other. And that was an important part of the whole political process as well. And then I had done my master's degree by that point, and then I was approached by Gordon Campbell. There was a by-election happening, and asked whether or not I would consider running for the Legislative Assembly. So we had a family meeting, and I decided that I would do that. I had chaired the Mayor's Council for Metro Vancouver prior to that, so I had a lot of connections throughout the municipalities, and we were trying to develop a cohesive, coordinated approach to Metro Vancouver with 23 different municipalities. How could we actually blend and work together so that Metro Vancouver could be the best it possibly could? And we went through a process we called Creating Our Future, and how are we going to do that? And it was a wonderful process to go through and do that. So I took the information from that, and I did run, and I was again an MLA for 20 years with a number of different cabinet posts. And you saw my little speech at the end, my little rapping as I was moving on. And by that point, I'd gone back and to Simon Fraser and taken my PhD, because I was interested in why don't we seem to learn from information or evidence or research? What is it about decision making? What is it about who we are? And we all see the world as you've described it. We all see it differently. We focus on those things that are important to us. So I needed to have that context from a theoretical perspective in terms of the things we're doing with. And one of my favorite quotes growing out of all that, and it's an Einstein quote, but I've adapted it. So basically, it says that our intuitive emotional self is a sacred gift, and our rational cognitive self is a dutiful servant. And we seem to have created a society in which we have forgotten about our sacred gift and are living with our dutiful servant. And for me, that really does reflect that so much of our decision making is done emotionally. We have this belief system, and Daniel Kahneman is the world's best known psychologist. He won a Nobel Prize for developing behavioral economics, and he was being introduced at a Davos conference years ago, and they said to him, "So how do we know what we know?" And we have this assumption that we gather information and come to conclusions. And he said, that's not at all what happens. He says we've got this way of being, this understanding as a result of growing up in our environment, and then we search for information to support what we already believe. It's not a linear process of gathering information and coming to conclusions. It is, we have these conclusions and look at areas and ways to support them, which explains why we've got a multicultural, pluralistic world, and there are a whole bunch of ways that are perfect ways to be in this world.
Yeah, I just going to put that in the show notes, Daniel Kahneman. It's funny, we're all connected by threads in our stories. I actually I just bought a book called Thinking Fast and Slow on Audible, and I think you'll recognize. I'm going to learn more about what you just said. I didn't even know we'd talk about that.
Yeah, yeah. He's got another book out since then that he's done with two other authors who are also distinguished people. But
Yeah,
he's certainly, and he was asked at Davos, what's the most important thing that we can know that might change the world? He said, oh, that's the focusing illusion. And he said the focusing illusion is nothing's as important as we think it is while we're thinking about it. And I think that
wow.
was a really interesting comment. Again, how do we find those things that are important to us and our values and our way of relating to others and to our world? And we get overwhelmed by them sometimes and focus in on them and become so focused that we lose the context, the relationships, and the things that are a part of them.
Yeah, I think I'm loving the conversation with you, Gordie, especially in that area. Everybody, another teaching moment. Gordie's got in and started or had a big, long career. He's still doing lots of board work and helping organizations. There might be more big things in the future. We don't know. But he's teaching us things about how we think and things that we don't normally hear from others. The PhD fascinates me, Gordie. I know we'll probably have you back to talk about that. But I want to go back and look at this storyline. So there, you from the farm, you took this path into politics. But I'm really fascinated by the helping of children and by the taking in foster kids. Everybody, I can't show you the picture because I didn't steal it from Gordie. I wish I did. But you showed me this picture of your beautiful house. And by the way, Laverne is your wife. And for the American audience, we should mention when we talk about people like Gordon Campbell and legislature and all, we're talking about the former British Columbia premier. Gordie's very well respected in this circle. You showed me something about a basketball. Just tell us about that. There was something you did with your house. I was blown away.
Well, we almost had our mortgage paid off, and we had a big backyard, so we built a basketball court in our house. And it's
In your house.
in our house. It's 40 by 25, so there's a 3-point line, and Laverne wanted to have a family room, so we allowed that to happen. But we also have a shuffleboard and 3 pinball machines and a Wurlitzer, and all the neighborhood kids come here quite regularly to shoot baskets and play pinball and have a good time. So it's been and we have before pandemic, we have a block party every year at our house. And
Wow.
if it's raining, we all go into the gym. We've had wedding receptions in the gym, and it's turned out to be a great meeting place. And Laverne thought it was a stupid idea at first. She's come to embrace it and think it's okay. She grounds me in so many ways.
I love that. You first of all acknowledging and honor you with you recognizing your wife as somebody who's a strength in your life. I think men who are public, sometimes we forget about that. But I don't know. I think tell Laverne. I think Shaq would have something to say about that. I think he'd love to compare your court to his. So everybody, we'll put in the show notes Gordie's personal address. No, we won't do it. But so what I want to just throw something at you here about purpose and passion. So I've heard and like to know what you think about that. After careers, there's a big letdown for people because a lot of times we define ourselves by our careers, but we don't develop anything that's beyond that. And so here you are, and you've got this passion of the youth and all these things you do to serve. And I just, what is it that drives you forward to continue to serve?
Well, and I think it's value based, and certainly growing up in a family that the mother and father and siblings, who brother's a social worker, my sister's a nurse, my other sister's a lawyer, and so they've all been giving in some way or another, and certainly Dad gave all the time. And another thing, Mom said to us as we were growing up, invite all your friends for dinner Saturday nights. We'll always have hamburgers, and people can always come. And I remember probably 5 or 6 years after I graduated from high school, and I didn't realize this one friend of mine was on social assistance and his family, and he came for dinner almost every Saturday night, and he said how important it was. And of course, it never occurred to me. And I guess Mom probably knew far better about what was going on than I did. So those types of things that have an emotional connectedness with who we are and how we understand things, and how grateful that we must be for those opportunities we've had. And there's, I don't think I was terribly unique, that I just happened to have a lot of great opportunities and great support. And I remember another story with Dad. I played basketball at university in the first year there, and we went and we won a national championship in New Brunswick. And a friend of mine, Bill, and we didn't come back for final exams, failed everything. So and in those days they mailed out the marks, so I was going to the mailbox, and finally I sat down with the marks and across from Dad at the kitchen table, and he's looking at them, and he looked up and said, "Well, you know, son, I saved a couple dollars to help you go to university, but if you'd rather me make a down payment on a backhoe, I'm happy to do that." And I said, well, maybe I'll go back and try again, Dad. So, but there was no anger. There was nothing. It's just, okay, if this isn't right for you. So again, putting the onus and the not pressure, but putting the onus and responsibility back on me for making those decisions, and all of those things along the way. I reflect upon quite regularly and wonder where they come from in terms of that understanding.
Yeah, we honor your dad. You had a great mentor. Many parents learn from Gordie here. I mean, letting him make the decision, not telling him what he should do. I think that's great. Yeah. So you care a lot about children and youth, and I want to ask you a question about imposter syndrome. You get when you're a young guy, you're in politics. I mean, let's face it, Gordie, you're very humble, but becoming mayor and then parliament and all these things. I got some cool pictures. I just want to put one on the screen here. Just hang on to take you back in the audience. Tell us what that is.
Oh, that's me signing in at the House of Commons in Ottawa when I was elected. So that's just the signature, and the blanket is the blanket I have right here.
Oh, and my goodness! I didn't.
It's given to me by an Aboriginal.
Hold it up again.
It was given to me by Paul Lacerte, who started the Moose Hide campaign. He's an Indigenous leader, and the Moose Hide campaign is to bring awareness to domestic violence against women and children. And it's as a result of Along the Highway of Tears, he and his daughter were hunting on there. They shot a moose, and she burst into tears, said a woman might have been murdered here.
Wow.
And so they decided they had to do something. So I took them to the legislature in Victoria, and they started this, and then it's been in every legislature. And I also had them introduce them to the Prime Minister. And it has now been in every legislature in Canada. And
really?
Recently, the RCMP have approved these to be worn on their uniforms. The first time they've allowed anything that's not traditional to the RCMP to be worn on their uniforms. And I think there were 450,000 people that wore these. And on the day of remembrance for the Moose Hide campaign and the fasting day, 450,000 about 3 weeks ago across Canada.
That's fantastic. I just put that picture up again there, everybody. That they say a picture holds 1,000 words, and we remember stories and memories. That blanket there has significance. I didn't know that. I just was riffing in my head thinking when you started rapping, they just threw it over you in the legislature saying just shut up. But it actually had more.
They would have put it over my face if I was rapping. They wouldn't want to hear anything.
That's too funny. Just for the sake of our international listeners and viewers, what the Highway of Tears, just very quickly, what's that?
Well, that is a highway that's up in northern British Columbia, and it goes from the center down to the ocean front, and it's about an hour and a half, 2 hour drive, and there were a lot of Indigenous women in particular who were going along there, who were stopped and disappeared, and so that's why it was named the Highway of Tears. And now it's much better than it used to be, and they've handled that very well.
Wonderful.
Trying to move it. Yeah.
I love that, and that's part of I think about legacy. What are people doing with their stories and their work? And everybody you see, Gordie, throughout his life has created a legacy. Even the basketball court and the kids. I mean, those kids. I think those kids will go into life, Gordie. What do you think? And they'll be better off for it. Or at least they'll be telling stories about how this guy sort of took them in and helped them out, right?
Yeah, we actually have a fellow who was our neighbor 2 houses up, probably 15 or 20 years ago, and he's now moved. He's married now and living a block down to the south of here, but his kids come here all the time as well, which is kind of neat having that ongoing connection in terms of that. And I was reading your book, The Way of the Quiet Warrior, and reminiscing about Daniel Agali, And I had been invited to speak at a Commonwealth conference in Nigeria. And Daniel I'd met Daniel a number of times. And so he invited me to go out to his village, the village of Enwari
Oh
in
my.
Nigeria. So, and my sister went with me. Laverne was not feeling well. So we went to, I spoke at the conference, the Commonwealth conference, and then went out to this village. We was about a 2 hour flight, and then picked up by a car, and then
Wow.
then we went to a house where Daniel's parents lived and our mother lived, and they were having someone was there to ask for his sister's hand in marriage, but the groom didn't get to ask. It was the place was packed, and somebody was the spokesperson, and then we went from there into this boat with guys with AK-47s up the river, and
Goodness.
to this little village. And it's the village that Daniel, through support, has put a lot of, he put a school into it, and has done wonderful things. And so he's been a wonderful influence, and that I've spent time with him, and his family still lives in Surrey,
Yeah.
and he goes back and forth. So I've taken him to the legislature and introduced him there, and he's got a
That's
wonderful, positive approach, and his story is just a marvelous story as well.
Oh my goodness! Everybody, just Daniel Agali. I think a lot of Canadians know him. They coined a phrase somewhere. He's Canada's other son or something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I remember when I learned about him. I just want to riff on what you said. It's amazing. You have a worldview. Like now I'm stuck on that image of going up the river with the gun support, and it took me back into when I was a kid and watching Apocalypse Now at the old Stanley Theater in Vancouver
Yeah.
here. Going up the Nung River there, and you've got Martin Sheen in his little PT boat. None of us would ever experience that type of story. And this is the thing about Gordie, everybody I like, is that he tells his stories. Many people have this wisdom, they don't tell it, but in a story, we learn a lot. I remember Daniel said to me, he said, I said, why did you go to the Olympics? And he said this, he said, when we were kids wrestling in the mud pits, and it's Nigeria, right?
Yeah.
My brain sometimes
Yes.
has a blip. And he said, we used to look up at the sky, and he said, I didn't even know what that was, but it was an airplane, and they were told it's going to another land to the Olympics. And he said, I don't know what the Olympics are, but I wanted to go. And part of the thing that amazes me, I'm sure you know, Gordie, but I have some friends became Olympic athletes, some American skaters as well. And the amount of effort and work you have to put in for sometimes 2, 3, 4 years,
Yeah.
and there's no guarantee you'll even make the podium. A galley came over everybody to Canada and won a gold medal. And I still remember, if you do, Gordie, do you remember like your blanket? There he was with that, remember that Canadian flag?
Yeah, great story.
And he put it on the ground, and he kissed the flag. And here's a hero from Nigeria who's now in Canada. And by the way, I think, wouldn't you say that's one of the great things about our country, that we don't color people. Basically, he's a Canadian, and we can love him as much as anybody else.
Yeah, and I think it's a wonderful story about him, because he played at the Commonwealth Games before he went to the Olympics representing Nigeria. And the Commonwealth Games were in Victoria, and he tells the story of he decided that he really liked Canada, so he thought he was going to stay. So he came out of their dormitory, and he went up and saw a man standing on the street talking on his phone, and he stood beside him for a while. The guy said, "Yes, can I help you?" And Daniel said, "Well, I want to live in Canada. Can I come and stay with you?" And he said, "Well, I've got 2 children and a wife." He said, "Well, you must have lots of room then," because Daniel's experience was families of many, many kids.
That's right.
And actually, the fellow took him in for a while and helped him get going. And it's just a marvel story. And then he went to Simon Fraser University as well. And
Yeah.
it's just a delightful
it's
guy. And
Yeah, great story, and especially I didn't know you went down there, but man, I'm living through that one. Going back to what I was asking you about the career, they say there's this term, it's overused, I think, it's sometimes imposter syndrome, and it really means different things. But it's like, did you ever pinch yourself and say, is this really happening? And what was your biggest fear, and what was your biggest mistake, and how did you learn through that when you got into being mayor, etc.?
oh, I've made lots and lots of mistakes, and hopefully have learned from most of them, if not all of them. And sometimes I was probably revealing things about some of the people I was working with that I probably should not have, and felt badly about that. I felt it was moving a policy forward or something that, but using somebody's context, and in one case, a name which was inappropriate, and I shouldn't have done that. So there's those types of things. When I was the warden of our largest youth detention center, there were different times where I had to make decisions about whether people could go on passes and leave and on leave, and I made some decisions there that probably were wrong, but hopefully again have been able to learn from all of those. Although Laverne continues to remind me that I've still got an awful lot to learn, and I think we all know that no matter where we are in life, we've always got more that we can learn, more that we can understand, and more that we can do to contribute to the lives of the people in our communities. And those experiences, I guess, particularly when I was the Minister of Children and Family Development in British Columbia, I met with a number of parents of young children who had intellectual disabilities, and it was called community living, and it was with inside government. So I met for a year with a number of the parents and things, and we created, over the course of a year, we created something which is now in place called Community Living BC. And Community Living BC, I said, I'm prepared to give you all my non-statutory authority and all the budget. And we put together a Community Living BC, and our rules were, or the legislation said, you have to have 2 people with intellectual disabilities on the board, and everybody else has to have a relationship, a child or a partner or somebody with intellectual disabilities. And it was going back and forth with the government officials. Well, how are you going to find 30? How are you going to find lawyers? So we brought all the lawyers in and accountants for the board, and we won an international award from Inclusion International, saying this is a very forward-thinking process by which this has been developed. And it was these parents of children primarily that were able to put that together. And it's people with that lived experience, that emotional lived experience, that can make such a difference in the evolution and development of policy. And my other example around that was that with the Indigenous people, and one of our foster child is Indigenous, and I recognized when I was the minister that there's a disproportionate number of Indigenous people, Indigenous children in the care of the state. So I started meeting with Grand Chief Stuart Phillip, Grand Chief Ed John, Harley Desjardins, head of the Métis, and Scott Clark with the United Native Nations. And I said, I'm prepared to delegate all my non-statutory authority to you, but let's find out how we can do this. We met for about 7 months putting the processes together, and the deputy minister came to me and said, we're making great progress. Let's bring them down to Vancouver and see if we can sign a memorandum of understanding. So I said, well, just let me think about that. So I phoned a good friend of mine, Grand Chief Bernard Charles, who was a lawyer and happened to be Stephen Point, the Lieutenant Governor's law partner. I said, Bernard, this is what the deputy minister thinks. What do you think? And he said, Gord, that's a stupid idea. What we should do is bring them to our property, bring us to our reserve, and let's have a feast. So we did that. We went there for a feast. We had to play something called Indian poker, which I'd never heard of, but I had to provide 3 prizes. So I gave three assistant deputy ministers that would be their slaves for 2 days. They all loved that. We took a break for 15 minutes, sat around a picnic table, signed an MOU, and went back to playing Indian poker. As I was leaving, walking to the parking lot, one of the senior staff from Victoria was walking with me, and he said, do you know what just happened? I said, it was pretty neat. He said, if we had done this our way, we'd still be sitting in a hotel room in Vancouver 2 years from now. So again, what is it about the things that happen within the context of decision making? And one of the people I studied a bit when I did my doctorate is a guy named Cialdini, and he's a psychologist, and he wrote a book called Influence, which is the best-selling book on sales in 5 different languages. But he said, what you say or do before you make a decision or before you make an ask is more important than the ask. And I've seen so many examples of that through the course of my life, and there's lots of stories about how do you develop that relationship. The Indigenous people know about decision making, going back to how emotional and connected they are, and how that changes the context of the decisions.
That's fascinating. Everybody, another teaching moment, learning from Gordie about how you can use hacks of the brain. You can study and learn, how your words and what you do before you ask, you put your hand out, how you can influence people. I kind of stumbled in my career a bit and learned that by just chance, Gordie, a long time ago, not from a science point of view, which you've dug into, which I respect a lot. It's that I always used to say to people, especially when I was in my executive career, and I used to say to our sales team, people, first of all, people buy you first, not what you're selling. So it's about trust, rapport. And number two is, the pathway to changing somebody's behavior decision is to the heart or the emotion. And yet there's so many what I call red type salespeople. These are logic based people who go in and there's just like facts, figures. It's complete. It's kind of like, to me, it makes sense, but it's something that I think I can see in your career, you've used that to your benefit. And all of us who live through the laws and policies that you've helped the province of BC and the country make, we thank you for that service. A couple more questions for you. One is about, I really have an interest in people who have what I call celebrity status careers. And I'm not saying this for ego, you don't have one, but when you're in the public eye, when somebody Googles and they see things that put you up there as somebody who's well known. And I know there's this thing called dopamine that the brain creates in anticipation of reward. Everybody, it's not created at the time of reward. So you go out shopping and you buy that fancy thing, then you take it home, and 2 days later you're wondering where'd that feeling go. Well, it's the journey of getting there. So with all the stories and all the things, it's like adrenaline. I'm living through your life about your career, Gordie, and even the trips to the parliament. And I'm thinking about just how many things you were doing and successes and failures, up and downs. And now when you left the public space, what did you replace that with? Or do you wake up in the morning saying, I love myself, I feel fulfilled? Or when is enough enough? I mean, are you still looking for that to fulfill you, or have you really found that space that most people don't, which is to go back, to that same thing for that reason?
Well, I guess I'm on about 5 nonprofit boards now that are really, I feel I'm making a contribution to. One is Food Banks British Columbia, and we coordinate about 106 food banks around the province. Another is an organization called Brella, which is a Seniors Come Share Society that we have 3 different facilities in Surrey. One that really has intrigued me that is called, it's a national organization called Disability Without Poverty. And the CEO is a woman, a blind woman in Etobicoke. The chair of the board lives in Kelowna. And so I've been going back and forth, and I didn't really know what they were about at first. So I said, well, send me your stuff. So they sent me about, 40 pages of different things, and I read through them all. And again, going back to the notion that people don't seem to listen to information, evidence, or research. So I took their issues and I put it into one page. And this has been intriguing for me. So, and basically there's something in psychology called transference. Yeah. If I were to say to you, Tom, boy, maybe if you wore a blue shirt, that would make a difference. At some level, I'm telling you that you're wrong. And that's what the approach they were taking. And so many of us take as we approach government and other people. So I rewrote all of this data that they had and information. I said, and basically, and this is for them, and they've taken it. I said, we are so proud to be Canadians because we're signatories to the United Nations Statement on People with Disabilities. And we are so proud that Canada's Charter of Rights and Freedoms, I think it's paragraph 3, we refer to people with disabilities. Yeah. And how can we now assist you in being able to ameliorate the disparity that exists between our vision, our values, and what we're doing? And so again, instead of getting that transference, we're trying on the same side. So I was talking with the chair of the board. This was probably a month ago now, and she said, "Oh, this transference stuff, Gord, this has just changed my whole life." And I said, well, "What do you mean it's changed my whole life?" And she said, "Oh, you should hear me talk to my husband now. It's totally different." So
that is really a life changer.
Yeah. So when you ask, so those type of things, I still get some excitement about and the buzz about being able to do those things and want to be able to be. And I've been approached by a couple of other boards and opportunities. And so I'm actually an adjunct professor at Simon Fraser in criminology. And I've chosen not to teach because I don't want to teach virtually. I want to teach in person. Yeah. And I'm on a terrorism, violence, and security institute that is out of Simon Fraser, but has connections with Australia, United States. And so the gang activities intrigues me as well, and the issues growing out of that. So Yeah,
Yeah, it's. I was going to say, do you sleep? But again, everybody, when you look at Gordie's career, because many people are in just non political life, they finish up and they retire, and then afterwards, they don't always create that legacy or something to continue to serve. I'm seeing through your hero's journey story, because I developed that in my mind on the show, that this thread just stays through there about helping children and youth violence, this whole thread, which is amazing. And I did find you on LinkedIn and saw adjunct professor, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because that again, teaching is part of how Gordie's changing the world. I want to talk about self-care for a minute, Gordie. Laverne must be an amazing woman, as we've talked about. Haven't met her. But with all this going on throughout your career, how do you look after yourself? How do you make time for Gordie? What do you do to stay mentally healthy? And
well, I try to eat properly, and I try to be active. And Laverne, actually, I should tell one story about Laverne. We had three foster kids, and Laverne was not much older, well, maybe 4 or 5 years older than Slim. And we would have a family meeting every Sunday night, and we would talk about what we're going to do. And of course, so she was the only woman. And this, about, I don't know, a couple of months into this, she said, "Now each of you get a vote, don't you?" And the four of us said, "Yes, yes, we do." And she said, "And I get a vote too." And we said, "Yes, you do." She said, "From now on, I get 5 votes. You only get 1, and I'm overruling." And so she changed it. And it was funny, but it was also a wonderful statement that she made in terms of that. And as you're describing this, something else comes to mind. I remember when my dad was working incessantly. I mean, he was working night and day as a family physician, and he decided to retire in his 60s. And we were so worried. What the heck was he going to do? And he never missed a beat. He started delivering Meals on Wheels. He drove children to Portland, to the Shriners Hospital, to do things there. He was more actively involved in a Rotary. He just there was no change. But I remember me and my sisters and my brother, well, what Dad's going to do now? He's always been so busy. And we were sort of concerned, but we shouldn't have been. He just moved on and was able to do that. And I think he set a good example for all of us in that fashion.
yeah, that's great. I think about values and belief systems and how important that is. We keep our own, right, as we get older, when we rationalize thinking, but a lot of times we look around at what's going on, and many gifts that came through that. What's ahead of the horizon for you? I know there's been talk, you and I have talked about it, about politics again. You don't have to reveal any secrets or anything, but where do you see yourself in the next few years?
Well, I see myself, I mean, I've been approached about politics. That's something that I'll explore a little further. I really have enjoyed my work with Food Banks British Columbia and with Brella, and I've been able to make, I think, my experiences have been helped in terms of that. My connections in terms of governments, we've been able to help get some grants. Food Banks British Columbia in particular, we were able to get a large grant from the provincial government that helped us buy fridges and freezers for some of the very small and remote food banks that had a lot of food wastage. Those things are neat to see. And if I can continue to make a positive difference in the desires of organizations, but mostly in people, how do we ensure that? And I think we're particularly unique in Surrey, British Columbia, where we have, I think we best exemplify the multicultural, pluralistic nature of Canada's Constitution, of Canada's values. And I think that we've got agricultural land, we've got agricultural land reserves, we are on the Pacific Ocean, we're on the US border. And I think that we will soon be one of the most important cities in Canada. And I'd like to help contribute to that happening in meaningful ways. And whether that's just continuing to push those ideas and the values around those. And certainly I'm aware of the United Nations has made a statement around the cities' role within about 17 different value statements around environment. And I've been looking at those and referring those to different levels of government to look at and to be involved in. I think the big value picture, how do we start applying those important national values to our communities? And again, that I think I made reference to about 3 or 4 years ago. I gave a TEDx talk, and my talk was basically that wherever we go in the world, doesn't matter where we go, most people care about exactly the same things. They care about family, and they care about community, and they care about getting ahead, whether it's emotionally or spiritually or economically. And we should be celebrating that sameness that exists amongst us instead of talking about the differences. There's so many opportunities for us to connect, and there's something called contact theory. I'm wandering off on here, Tom. Contact theory.
I love it.
So there's so often we identify people with the things they've done or the things they say, and we don't see them. And there's a wonderful book called High Conflict. And high conflict is when you're not able to separate the ideas and things from the person.
Yeah.
And so there's a lawyer in just north of San Francisco, and he was approached by a couple friends of his who said, "We want a divorce, and we want you to represent both of us." And he's a lawyer, and he said, "Well, that's not how it works." Well, he eventually did. And then he's spoken to law societies across the United States about that, and it's become quite popular. And so this small community he lived in of about 1,500 people was having all kinds of conflict. So they approached him and said, "You've got to be our mayor." So in that you elect the council picks the mayor. So he decided he would do that because he's the expert in mediation and arbitration. He said within 1/8 of a second, he was in high conflict. He said that political environment is just so different. And he said, and he did a terrible job in the first year, and then he stepped back but stayed on council, and then he was able to get settled back. But there are lots of examples of what high conflict is. But contact theory basically says when you spend a bit of time with somebody, you find that they're a lot easier. And there's a wonderful story about some Jewish families in New York who had conflict with some people in Michigan, and the arbitrators actually had the Michigan people go and stay with some of the people in New York. And they, as a result of that, they said, it's amazing that they're actually really nice people. The one reference they made was, however, before they went back to Michigan, they went to Trump Tower and bought some Trump trivia, and we weren't sure we liked that. But basically, that is, and there's the research around what's happened with big gangs in Chicago with major conflict and spending time together. So contact theory, getting to know people, getting to open up and share that is a wonderful thing for us to embrace.
Yeah, I think, and you really walk the talk of what you're teaching there. Everybody, lots of teaching moments you just heard from Gordie. A few things came in my mind. Want to just throw it out there. One is about the conflict. Geez, Gordie, I mean, I think I'm teaching. I have an education company, and I do coach executives. I have programs I run. That was my background was a CEO type transformer in companies, and these. I teach now. The one thing I teach now is no news. Like turn off the bloody TV. And when you talk about conflict, like American politics, I have a lot of friends in America, and I'm starting to take them off my social feeds because you watch. I kind of think this way. I say, okay, if politicians are in the world to influence children, and we know that whatever they hear and see influences the way they think, the way they feel, and possibly those people grow up to be leaders and influencers in society, then why do the American politicians, they're so ruthless, tearing each other down, and it's just ridiculous. I'd rather see Gordie doing his rap dance or talking. I mean, you're a kind person. I know, behind closed doors there's debates and things, but I just want to put it out there that it really is a field. Somebody said to me a while ago when we were talking about politics that I sure wouldn't want to be involved in the United States. And maybe that's just something, we look at the way the world is so messed up. The last thing around that, I was thinking when you said about politics, like possibly, maybe you're looking at some things. I saw a post about our premier he's stepping down.
Okay.
I don't know all the reasons. I know he battled some health issues. He looks pretty thin too, but hope he's okay. And I was thinking, man, the decision to step in and take a role like that now, when you look at, I wrote down on a piece of paper yesterday, if I was stepping into that role, what would be all the issues that I would have to deal with? And now it's not just British Columbia, but it's this whole European possible third world war. It's recession, the price of oil, it's all this supply chain. It's a huge it's a huge job to be involved in leadership.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering if you look at it that way, how how I mean, would you step into that arena? I'm not suggesting anything about you here in terms of being a premier, but is it too complex a world to get into leadership now?
It is complex, but it's ever more important that we have people that do that. And just you made me think of what we had our Food Banks BC. We had our 3-day conference about 2 weeks ago,
Yeah.
and I chaired a session with some of the very small food banks around the province. And they said, every one of them said something that basically the same thing. They said during the pandemic, we've had more contributions than we've ever had. And sadly, they said, or particularly, well, one in particular, but all of them agreed, said social media is making it very difficult. She said
Wow.
in some examples, they had people that were picketing outside of their food bank saying, these people don't deserve to get food because every restaurant needs somebody. There are jobs for everyone. So this social media that we've always had those people with those thoughts that exist in our community, but through social media now they connect within the community, connect within the province, within the country, and around the world. And
Yeah.
when we saw those the Muslim family of 4 just over a year ago was run down by a white racist in London,
Yes.
Ontario, and growing out of that. So I've attended 2 sessions about that, in memory of that. And I was just looking up some research, and apparently we are getting close in Canada to having something like over 250 white supremacist groups. Now
Wow.
that boggles me, but it's the social media connections that apparently do that. And in the United States, I'm sure they have
That's crazy.
obviously that magnified hundreds of times. But when no matter what your belief system is, you can find things that will reinforce and support that. So how do we ensure that the values are important in that the values of humanity and caring and commitment to each other?
Yeah.
We live in a social society, but social media is allowing people to attack them for
Yeah.
reasons that are inconsistent, that are values that are not consistent with what our majority of values are as Canadians and as members of the United Nations and members of our world. So how do we deal with that? And I think that, as you're describing, that there are some people that really I don't want to be involved in that, but it's ever so important that
Yeah.
the people who care and are committed do stay involved in that and do reference that and reference it for the right reasons. I watching some of the things happening in the United States where people say, well, I'm not supporting that, or I'm not supporting whatever it might be because it might hurt me get my reelection, instead of
Yeah.
being grounded in the values that are important, and which being reelected is not one of them.
Yeah, it reminds me of, and by the way, I was going to say that earlier, that there's many politicians and there's lots of stories out there of politicians who fell from grace or maybe aren't loved or liked. And everyone, there's a bit of a fascination here I have because here's Gordie, it's hard to find dirt on you. I'm sure there's mistakes you've made, but I think generally you're a man of integrity, a kind person, a hell of a servant. And, you're one of the most likable people that's been in public life. That is really hard to sustain over a lifetime. And I don't expect you to answer on that because, you're humble, but whatever your secret sauce is, and I mean, package that, teach it to children and youth. And I think it comes through your learning about building relationships, all this stuff you've been teaching us today on the show. I just think it's fabulous. Want to do a couple things as we wrap up here. I have a really big question before I give you a couple of acknowledgments. One is, how do you like your hamburger cooked and what's on it?
Well, when I was going to UBC and didn't have much money, we lived on, a friend of mine, Brian Compton, and I lived not far from a white spot. And so we would often walk up to the white spot and wait for people to leave, would leave their little bits of hamburger and we would sit it down and finish the pieces for them. And a white spot hamburger with that secret sauce, that triple O sauce, was and continues to be one of my favorites.
Yeah, I actually, because I'm a home chef, so we talk about what connects people and their passions. If you go to the Quiet Warrior Eats, actually have a little shameless plug here, Gordie. I escaped what was going on in my home as a kid by cooking, and this is a passion. I do a lot of things, but so I go and create food. But what I started doing was because I live by, in a village setting where I can go to my butcher and my fishmonger, everything's here.
Yeah.
And especially when I got my brain injury, I needed to keep healthy. I come up, like, for example, I'm talking to Gordie Hogg here. I will then go for a walk to the village and look at stuff, and my brain says that, because I'm creating a picture of something between Gordie and I, and then I'll go cook and create a plate. Anyway, if you go to the Quiet Warrior Eats, you'll see all these plates I've created over the years. I'm getting people messaging me saying, "Are you a chef?" And so I actually, a little bit of fun here. Maybe I'll cook for you one day, but I'm thinking of, bought some gear to actually tape my first cooking show in my kitchen. But why I'm telling you that story is that that's something that creates passion for me. That's something I feel no pain and I love. And I remember you said something really helpful to us, that we're all connected by these single threads. We have to find that. There's a cooking show host who met the Dalai Lama, and I watched the show, and they were talking about food, and there was this aha moment where Dalai Lama said, "I think you're right." He said, "The one thing in the world that everybody can connect to is food. It unites everybody." I go sit at an Indian restaurant, Chinese restaurant. I go in there. I'm not racist. I don't have issues. I love the food. So I really enjoyed sharing those insights with you. What we're going to do now is we're going to honor you with something kind of fun here. So hold on, Gordie. I'm going to full screen me for a minute, so bear with me. So if you can see there on the flat screen, that's an image. Gordie, I'll bring you back here. That's an image. I don't know if you've heard of challenge coins. I'm pretty sure a guy like you probably have some. The challenge coins are started in World War I, and they were carried in the pockets of soldiers to commit community. And, they had fun with it. If you didn't show up with yours, you bought dinner or drinks. And I know when my dad was in AA for 22 years, he had a coin. First responders have those. When I started the show, Gordie, I really just started it as an idea to bring people like you or from around the world and tell their stories so we can learn. I created this as the show award. So it's handcrafted and painted, minted in the US. The front of it is the image of the show. The back is actually the fully illustrated hero's journey narrative, which is behind the show. So today, because you are such a man of less ego and more humility and teaching, we're inducting you into the Quiet Warriors. We have these coins now in 17 countries. About 40 a year will go out. They're very hard to get. And if you go to the archives of our show, some of the people that carry them are pretty amazing people like yourself. So congratulations. Welcome to the tribe.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah, that can hopefully. So you and I will meet, so I can give it to you in person. This is when I don't have to. So we're gonna just put a little fireworks up there. We're gonna celebrating Gordie here, everybody. Welcome to the Quiet Warrior tribe. And last, I want to honor you with 4 words. These are leadership words, maybe 5. I've just been writing them down as I talk to you. One is worldview. Gordie has a worldview, which really is a gift. Number 2 is love, Gordie. You're humble, but there's something that comes out of you when you talk about people and helping others. 3 is trailblazer. There was a movie called Moneyball, and they said the first one through the wall gets bloody. And I think in many of the things you told us you've done in your life, you're not afraid to get bloody, man. I think it's awesome. 4 is humility. And 5 is connector. There's a book I read a long time ago by Malcolm Gladwell, and he kind of characterized people, Gordie, and he said there's mavens and there's connectors. And if you find somebody who's both, it's like that person is the person you want to know. Connector is somebody who can connect people, just like, you meet somebody and you say, "Hey, I'll introduce you to Parliament," or meet somebody. By the way, I like a tour of Parliament, Gordie. Just put that on your short list. And so Gordie's a connector, everybody, and he gives. So the person you want to get to know, and behind everybody are much more people. So on that note, I'll give it to you to wrap us up. I mean, you can do a rap song, or you can maybe the question you can leave us on is, if you look ahead in the world when you're done with this world, what do you want to leave as your legacy? You probably told us about a lot of that.
Well, I guess as you were talking about being a chef and walking and cooking, one thing that came to mind is, firstly, when the Kentucky Fried Chicken opened in South Surrey, White Rock, I was in high school. 2 of my friends, we went up and stole the cardboard Colonel Saunders, took them back to Mom and Dad's, put a blindfold on him, and sent a note to them: "If you ever want to see the Colonel again, leave 3 chicken dinners at the end of the counter at 3:00 a day." So we drove back up there, and there were the 3 chicken dinners. We served up the Colonel Saunders, and about, I don't know how many years later, that this is in the local paper that
Yeah.
that I had kidnapped the colonel, and it was. But you're talking about walking and experiencing things. There's we talked about Daniel Kahneman earlier, and Daniel Kahneman, a lot of his research with his research partner was a guy named Amos Tversky, and they would go out and walk, and that's how they learned. They didn't sit in a laboratory doing things. They actually walked and talked in the environment. And I think there's such a good connection that happens with people and with the environment and the things that happen. So again, that's that blend of the thought process and the emotionality that exists in terming that. And to the quick anecdote about that, one of the research that they didn't do, but they reference is that they took 100 x-rays and gave it to 50 radiologists at the desk, and they were some anomalies in them. The people at their desk, the radiologists, got about 85% of them right. They took the same ones and gave them to 100 other radiologists who were on a treadmill. They got 99% right.
Wow.
So what happens when we're actually engaged, not just thought process, but actually have things going and doing? So I hope that I can continue to learn, to be engaged, to be passionate about things, and until the time is for me to move on. And so I will do everything I can to do and to contribute in a meaningful way. And we're going to become grandparents on July 10th is our granddaughter is due. So that's something we're excited about as well.
Gordie, that's going to change your life, man. I know a little bit about that through my wife's, well, she has, I have two stepsons who are older, but got an 8-year-old. And that's amazing. I think you'll make a great granddad. You got to teach her how to shoot hoops, okay?
Okay. Got that. Wind the hoop down so it's this high so she can dunk when she can walk.
Exactly. And always come down to her level when you're teaching her. That's pretty amazing.
That's great. Yeah.
Well, everybody, find that true passion like you've heard from Gordie there, and turn it into a purpose to change people's lives, and live that life that you deserve and desire. Gordie, I just can't say how much I love you and your story. Thanks for being here. I know I'll talk to you again, and you've really been a treat to have on the show.
Well, thank you very much for sharing. It's been a delight having you find all these parts of me that I'd forgotten about and pulling them out again and engaging. So thank you so much for what you do.
You're welcome. Just stand by there, Gordie. We're just going to wrap up here, and then I'll come back to you.
Element Firm, www.kreat.ca.
All right, that's a wrap. How did it go, Gordie? I had a lot of
fun. We went a lot longer than I thought we were going to go.
I'm telling you, the storytelling is it.